Welcome to the afternoon panel, the militancy panel. I'm Jenny Berman. I'm a faculty member and I'm the chair of Art History and Communication Studies, which is where Media at McGill is based. So what I'll do is introduce Nathalie, and then Nathalie can give her presentation, and then I'll come back and introduce Ultra Red and Don't Rhine. Nathalie Casemajor is an assistant professor in communication at in the Department of Social Science at the Université de Québec in Gatineau. She holds a PhD in communication from UQAM here in Montreal and a doctorate in information and communication sciences from Université Lille, Troyes. She was a postdoctoral fellow at McGill, and she was involved in the Media and Urban Life project, as was I, that was headed by Will Straw. And for Montrealers, I'll say she did some really interesting work on that fence that people cut when they want to cross the train track north of Mile End, and then the railway security keeps patching it back up, and the police keep patching it back up, and the people who want to cross it keep cutting it open again. She did this really interesting work on that. She was also a fellow at the INRS, the National Institute of Scientific Research, and a visiting scholar at NYU in the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication. Her work focuses on digital culture, archives, and collective memory. And the title of her paper is The Digital Drift of Derivative Artifacts. Nathalie.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you again for organizing this amazing event. I would also like to thank Natasha Tchaikovsky, who assisted me in collecting some of the data for my presentation today and who helped with translation of my text. Visual symbols play a key role in militancy, social mobilization, and collective affects. In 2012, the Red Square became an iconic sign for supporters of the Quebec student uprising to rally around. Since then, it has become subsumed into the visual culture of Quebec and beyond. With the embrace of this symbol in New York, Paris, and around the world, the Red Square is now ubiquitous in the global imagination of political struggles. Now, 2 years after the Maple Spring, from the French Printemps Érable, thousands are taking to the streets again in Quebec to protest austerity and cuts in education, health services, and social services. Last month, more than 80,000 students were on strike. One of the collectives that participated in this mobilization is calling for a 2015 spring uprising, a new mass mobilization against austerity. The symbol they chose to represent this forthcoming movement, however, is not the Red Square, which is already enshrined in history, but a new emblem, the image of a wolf. This is not a lone wolf, but rather a social wolf, able to bare its teeth to protect its habitat and living conditions. It is hard to say at this point if this new symbol will experience the same popularity as the Red Square, but it aims to mark the beginning of a new collective mobilization. There is much already written about the material history of the Red Square. The book À force d'imagination, published last year, gathers a very rich collection of posters and artifacts of the Quebec student movement from 1958 to 2013. This publication includes an essay by Viviane Labrie, who witnessed the first iterations of Red Squares in 2004, taped on cloth at a meeting organized by the collective Québec sans pauvreté, Quebec without poverty. The legacy and narrative of the Red Square is well known. Most of you have likely seen the felt and pin format popularized by student associations and know how this symbol proliferated and materialized on innumerable surfaces like knit, snow, walls, and bodies. I will add to this material story of the Red Square in considering its digital materiality. A digital picture of a red square is also a material artifact. It is stored in a geographical location, subjected to specific regimes of ownership, and it acquires social and material properties of its own. Digital images are a specific kind of artifact that proliferate in an environment characterized by enhanced reproducibility and global reach. The moment an image is posted on the internet, it starts to drift. As it is shared and resaved, copied and modified, it becomes fractured into many instances, creating derivative artifacts in this process. It is particularly interesting to think of the trails that this process leaves as a visual network of spatio-temporal trajectories. The anthropologist Alfred Gell proposed the notion of distributed objects as a means to map the distribution patterns in material forms. Here's a graph he created to study an artist's production over the span of their career. The dots represent artifacts that share a common origin, and the arrows represent variations and transformations from one to another, distributed along a chronological axis. Taken together, these distributed artifacts create a macro object that grows over time, and it takes the form of what Gell calls a historical geographical network. This graph can be adapted to study the material history of digital artifacts. It can map clusters of online images connected by spatio-temporal networks. Digital materialism provides a theoretical background to think about the materiality and circulation of online images. In particular, there is a branch of digital materialism that combines insights from cultural anthropology with digital forensic studies. In the introduction of the anthology, The Social Life of Things, Commodities in Cultural Perspective, Arjun Appadurai describes how objects are transformed and subsequently acquire different regimes of value as they move through space and time. He proposes a methodology that follows the things themselves and traces their forms, their uses, their trajectories as they move from one hand to another, from one context to another. From a methodological point of view, he writes, it is the things in motion that illuminate their human and social contexts. What can an image trajectory tell us about the social and technical contexts in which it circulates? These things in motion can be mapped visually, and from this visual map we can analyze these networks from several perspectives. First, the dimension of social spaces. These networks are traces of social practices, how an image is produced, invested with meanings and legitimacy, appropriated and reappropriated, institutionalized or marginalized. These practices actualize social networks, for example, networks of support and collaboration between activists, and they are part of a cultural economy animated by logics of commodification and communalization. We can also analyze these visual networks in terms of circulation between physical spaces, from the physical space of the streets to the physical space of web servers, to the physical space of art galleries and archives. We can analyze them as movement between media spaces, from digital format to printed format, from Dropbox to Facebook to Flickr to a blog to CBC's website. And finally, we can analyze them from a temporal perspective. First, the viral dissemination and activation of the symbol in times of intense mobilization, and then the long-term sedimentation of memory and the preservation in formal archives. The various digital archives that gave birth to the book À force d'imagination are a good example of these social, physical, mediating, and temporal trajectories. David Widgington is among the contributors of the book project. He created several web repositories at the intersection of online spaces of organization and online spaces of archiving. He started collecting images of the Red Square from Facebook, searching in groups and pages where students organized their marches and meetings. And then he moved the archive to the photo-sharing website Flickr. And later, he created a website to give access to the collection of images, some of which were published in the book. What follows is a consideration of how the method of tracing physical objects through networks of temporal and geographical specificity can be applied to digital images. How can we track the digital drift of these derivative artifacts? How can we follow the material histories and the social trajectories of these digital images? I will outline some of the tools and methods that can be employed to map visual networks and movements of images online. Precise contextualization is crucial for retracing the life of an image. To reconstruct visual networks, we need to know the context of creation, who created the image, where and when, but also we need to know its context of circulation, who published the image online, when and where. There are three main types of tools available to collect the traces of an image circulating on the web. Watermarks, used for copyright enforcement, digital fingerprints, used by reverse image search engines, and metadata analysis. The first two provide information regarding duplicates and variants of an original image, while the last one can be used to analyze images at any point at which they are found on an online network. While I will avoid delving into too many details regarding technical aspects of these methods, it is important nonetheless to outline how these tools work to try and open the black box of technology. From examining its internal workings, we can develop a better understanding of how the circulation of digital images are embedded in fields of power, economics, and politics. It is especially important to investigate the academic uses of these tools and their potential to collect data on social movements and radical activism. These alternative uses are particularly compelling in considering their original function was for copyright management and forensic analysis. How can we use these tools? How can these tools be used for trajectory analysis? For pictures of the red square, there is no single point of origin. It cannot be traced back to one trajectory, since innumerable different images and versions of the red square were posted online within a short span of time. But a single source, like this image posted on Wikimedia Commons, can be identified and analyzed through the social and media spaces in which it was appropriated. This process can lead to information about activist networks and connections between different social struggles. For example, this image of a red square was distributed on the campus of the Université de Montreal in 2012. It was created by a user under the pseudonym Eshkotimiu, and this user says in his profile he identifies with extreme left. The same image was later used to illustrate the Wikipedia page on Cooper Union financial crisis and tuition protests, where the symbol got associated with the Cooper Union clock tower. Other copies of this specific image appear on personal blogs, alternative or community media in France and Canada, but also in commercial contexts where the symbol gets completely depoliticized, such as the website of this haberdashery company, where it advertises a catalog of felt along with zippers and straps. If we attempt to analyze more recent images, such as this image of the Collective Spring 2015, what we find is not a trajectory of dissemination, because the image has not yet been widely circulated, but rather the source image that was reappropriated by activists to create the poster, which was also appropriated by many different commercial products, including Wolf P. Don't ask me why Wolf P is for, I have no idea. These are a few examples of the spatial dimensions of visual networks. The image's temporal dimension, how its trajectories unfold in time and when an image was created, cannot be identified through search engines' results. TNI, for example, one of these search engines, will only tell you when an image has been crawled, not when it was published. Social networks such as Twitter and Facebook may provide information about when a user posted an image, but not necessarily when this picture was taken. And this is where metadata can prove useful. Metadata is a set of descriptive, technical, or administrative information that is attached to an image file. It provides clues about an image's pedigree. It can also help to identify modification and forgeries. To extract embedded metadata from an image, specific tools are required. Several are freely available online, such as the website photoforensic.com that I used for this research and presentation. And there are many different standards of image metadata. The main ones are EXIF, IPTC, and XMP. I won't have time to go into details about these standards. Metadata analysis raises several methodological and ethical challenges. I am now going to address some of the issues I encountered while analyzing images from the Maple Spring with metadata. So, first observation is, this is an example of a platform that you can use to embed metadata in one of your images. And this is an example of results that you get from the website or any tool that extracts metadata from an image. So first observation from this analysis is bad news for scholars. The metadata we're able to collect on circulating images is fragmented and incomplete. One of the main problems is metadata stripping. The quantity and quality of metadata available varies with how different web services and social media platforms technically handle images. The result of metadata analysis on 327 red square images collected on the Flickr account Artefacts d'un Printemps Québécois show that only 7% of these images held EXIF metadata. Out of 25 randomly selected in the album, only 5 contained a date of creation. These results indicate that metadata analysis can only provide partial information on a limited number of images, but it also shows that metadata can retain traces of which websites the image transited through. The last line on the slide indicates that 20 out of 25 images hold in their metadata the mention profile copyright FB. This line appears in the ICC metadata, which concern the color profile of the image. It does not mean that Facebook claims the copyright on the image, but that the image was posted on Facebook at some point of its journey, and that Facebook embedded its color profile into the image. But Facebook does something else. When you upload an image to the platform, it also strips out most metadata, especially the date of creation and geolocation, so that it becomes impossible to gather this kind of information from an image that transited through Facebook. Twitter and most social media platforms also strip this data. As a consequence, the more an image circulates, the more its metadata gets reduced, which means that the quantity and quality of information available to researchers gets poorer and poorer. Second observation is good news for activists. Metadata removal allows for more privacy, anonymity, and protection of sensitive information. When we publish and share images online, we are not always aware of the hidden information that we might send along with these pictures. Take, for example, this image from the Maple Spring, or images of spectacular actions when red squares were displayed on Montreal's architectural icons. In the context of protests or direct action, information such as author credit, date, and exact time of creation, as well as geolocation, become extremely sensitive. In most digital cameras and smartphones, the date and time of creation are automatically embedded in the image via EXIF metadata. For the name of the author to be added in the metadata, it takes one additional step: the use of software such as Adobe Bridge to sort out photographs on a computer. When it is programmed with profile information, will add this extra data, the name. If this process is done once and subsequently forgotten about, users might unknowingly upload photographs, including their names, systematically embedded in the IPTC metadata. Concerning geolocation, many cameras and most mobile phones have a built-in GPS receiver that automatically tags your pictures with geolocation information. This function can be easily disabled by checking the privacy settings on your mobile phone. In 2012, the FBI used geolocation metadata embedded in this picture to identify a member of the hacker collective Anonymous and to prove his involvement in the stealing of confidential data. This hacker, known as Anon Wormer, released this photograph along with data stolen from law enforcement agencies. The FBI linked the geographical coordinates of the image, pointing to Australia, with information the hacker had posted on Facebook about his Australian girlfriend. I'm going to move on to the next slide so that you can concentrate on what I'm saying. In terms of ethics in scholarly research, the collection and analysis of image metadata raises several concerns regarding consent and privacy. Those who publicly share their photographs on Flickr consent to their images being made public, so they are not usually considered as participants who should be informed of the research. Yet the status of embedded metadata is problematic. It sets an ambiguity between accessibility, visibility, and publicness. To what extent can we consider embedded metadata as public information? The image and its metadata are publicly accessible. They are not private in the sense that they were shared and that public access is granted to anyone. But what is problematic is the fact that the metadata is hidden within the image. It is not immediately visible. Disclosing this information changes its status from something that was hidden to something that is publicly exposed. Such ethical questions are at stake in many research projects that involve collecting data from social media platforms. Helen Nissenbaum suggested that attention be paid to privacy as contextual integrity, that's her words. By this, she means that information gathering and dissemination should respect the norms of the original context where the information was found. Guillaume Lascotot and Madeleine Pastinelli suggested that different, quote, degrees of publicity, unquote, of online content should also be taken into consideration. This means that amplifying the visibility of information, such as author's name or geolocation of an image, could expose individuals to potential risks. These are responsibilities we should be especially cautious about when studying militant practices or contexts of political dissent. Third and last observation is actually a question. What will be preserved of the Maple Spring digital memory? Depending on what kind of uses authors allow or restrict, images tend to enter or stay outside of cycles of commodification and long-term preservation. In the case of artists who are deeply involved in social movements and whose visual production is put at the service of mobilization, negotiating these questions of copyright and anonymity can be quite complex. Clément de Goléjac is one of the artists whose production became a visual landmark of the Maple Spring. Says paper is for stake. He did not hide his identity, but he also did not sign his drawings, and he refused to sell them. To explain his position, he said, I quote, "The same way a protester throwing back a smoke bomb on the police side does not sign her gesture, my posters were anonymous, which made them easily appropriable." In his publication Foucault Anonymat, Éric Bordelot investigates the relationship between art, political resistance, and anonymity. He outlines two kinds of anonymity. One is strategic. It consists in dissimulating one's identity to avoid exposing oneself to legal consequences or repression. And the second one is experiential. It consists in existing in what has no name, as Heidegger says, or to shelter one's voice in the vast anonymous murmur of discourses, as writes Foucault. This experience of desubjectification also operates as a mode of production of the commons. Clément de Goléjac disseminated his digital drawings from his website, and he also organized open silk screening workshops called Diffuse et Résiste, Disseminate and Resist, where he proposed paper versions of his posters that were later given out during street protests. Last year, about 80 of his silk screens were exhibited at the Artist-Run Center School in Montreal, and at this occasion, the art critic Bernard Schutz wrote a text in which he suggested that the collection be donated to a Montreal archive so that it could avoid recuperation by the art market and be preserved as a document belonging to the public. A few months later, the collection was donated to Artefacts, a repository for contemporary Canadian art publications. What was donated was the printed paper versions of the digital posters. This is great news, since traditionally institutions collect mainstream materials and books, leaving aside most alternative media and small-scale productions. But what will happen to digital images that were not intended to be printed? What about the preservation of the low-quality images and native digital formats, such as animated GIFs, digital posters, and memes, that also played an essential role in the visual imagination of the Maple Spring? Here's an example of a GIF from l'École de la Montagne Rouge, a design collective who created some of the most iconic posters of the Maple Spring. And here is an example of a digital painting by an anonymous artist who uses the pseudonym Art Act. There's no canvas here. It's completely digital. There's no previous canvas. In the case of images whose authors remain anonymous and whose formats cannot be easily translated into printed media, the route to long preservation is less obvious. What kind of open, long-term digital repository could host these artifacts and at the same time guarantee a free, easy, and wide access now and in the future? The Centre de Recherche sur l'Imagerie Populaire, located at Université du Québec in Montreal, here in Montreal, has collected several posters in JPEG and PDF, but the digital format was mainly a substitute for paper versions when these could not be collected. Some visual material from the Maple Spring, mainly photographs, made their way into Wikimedia Commons, the copyleft media file repository behind Wikipedia. The advantage of this platform is that it allows the storage of high-resolution images in all types of formats, JPEGs, animated GIFs, videos, soundtracks, and so on. It keeps the original metadata of the image intact and interoperable, and it provides good chances of long-term preservation. However, authors who upload their images into Wikimedia Commons must be comfortable with granting everyone the right to reuse and remix their intellectual property, including for commercial use, since the copyleft license used by this platform is close to public domain status and allows both circuits of communalization and commodification. As a conclusive remark, I would like to briefly address the question of collective memory and its public representation in Canada. Whereas archives of militancy are often precarious, relying on small-scale budgets and volunteer work, the memory apparatus of the state is a powerful tool to durably inscribe manufactured official histories. State archives and libraries are one of these tools, as are monuments displayed in the public space of the street. There is a new monument that is going to be built next year in Ottawa. The charity Tribute to Liberty, actively supported by Prime Minister Stephen Harper, is in charge of a $4 million project for a monument to the victims of communism. Many people, including historians from the Canadian Historical Association, expressed concerns in front of what seems a gross manipulation of collective memory. In response, the collective Entrepreneurs de Commun, which I am a member of, as well as Michael Nardonin and Eric Bordelot, who are here today, is calling for an anti-monument to the victims of liberty. It is a call for artistic projects. You're welcome to submit your project. We also launched a Kickstarter campaign to support the exhibition that's going to happen in Gatineau, just on the other side of the river to Ottawa. And we have paper copies at the welcome table of the call for projects, so please, and Michael also has some, so feel free to grab one and to ask us questions about this project. Thank you very much.